The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 95.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the EL. Today we have Wes Moss, author of You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think, The 5 Money Secrets of the Happiest Retirees. Welcome, Wes, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Wade, great to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Before we dive into the book, will you take just a moment to tell us just a little bit about you personally?
Well, I've been in financial media and been in the investment business for about 17 years now. And I think one of the most fun parts about being a CFP, an investment advisor, and I have 2 different companies that do that based out of Atlanta, Georgia, is the media side of the world. So I've been part of WSB Radio here in Atlanta for the better part of 6 years, doing their money reporting, talking about the economy, stock market, and really have had a lot of fun in the last year after writing this book, You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think. It's just been it's been fun getting the message out. And the impact that I've seen that already have on people. So it's nice to be able to have a very much a media centric career along with finance and investment. It's a nice combo.
Perfect. Now, thank you for sharing that portion about your personal life. And now let's take a deep dive into the book like we talked about. You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think, which was just made available not too long ago, actually June 2014. And Wes, we're going to move quickly, but the whole point here is to cover the top questions that our reader/listener wants to get answered before they purchase the book. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing the book?
Well, a couple of things. I would say the main thing is this. I have always had this thought of kind of this back and forth of, does money buy happiness? And I've thought of that in my entire career. And then probably growing up as a child. And I think especially in the entrepreneurial community, which I'm a big part of here in Atlanta, is that we've all, as entrepreneurs, had this fear of running out of money. So it's less about, hey, does money buy me happiness, and more, does money buy me comfort or cushion or safety or security? And I go back to a movie I watched back in 2006, one of my favorite movies. I still keep the movie ticket stub in my kind of my memento box that I look at, every at least once a week, and I have ever since 2006. And the movie ticket was The Pursuit of Happiness, and it's a story about that Will Smith played in the movie. It's again fairly well viewed and watched, and it's a really touching movie to me, where this was a door-to-door salesman that was doing what he needed to do. But his company went out of business, and he subsequently became homeless with a 5-year-old child. It's a really moving story of how he conquered that adversity, and then actually went on to become a really successful investment advisor. So that's always really hit home with me, and it's really stuck with me. About 4 years ago, I heard Dave Ramsey talk about a study out of Princeton that talked about money and happiness. And this study from Princeton, it was the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University, talked about how in order to be quote unquote happy in America, you needed to get to $75,000 a year in income. And that was just kind of the headline of it. And that was the gist of the research. And ever since then, I've thought of, okay, well, if money buys us security, and we're all trying to avoid financial disaster, what are some levels that get us to a point where we actually get to a quote unquote happy point? And I wanted to take that Woodrow Wilson School study a lot further. And that's what I did in the research that this project took about 2 years to do. And I took that question a lot further. I said, well, what are the financial levels of happy people who have gotten to retirement? They've gotten there early. What are the financial habits of that group? The consumer habits, life habits, behavioral habits, and compare that financially with an unhappy sample set, and then contrast those throughout the book so we can learn from what to do from the happy group and learn what not to do from the unhappy group. And that materialized into a much more interesting book than I had ever planned on it to be a couple of years ago. And once I got my research back, it really opened the door to what I think is a truly unique study on money and happiness. And that's what this book is all about.
Have you ever, I'm forgetting the guy's name, but have you ever had an opportunity to listen to the character that Will Smith plays in that movie? Have you ever had the opportunity to listen to him speak?
I have only through video. I've never seen him live, but I've heard it's Chris Gardner.
Yeah. Okay. Chris Gardner
is the character in the film, and well, in real life, that's the true story. But it's a wonderfully touching story.
It is, and he was telling us it's the one story that I've ever heard where Hollywood actually dumbed down the story. I heard him at a conference talk about it, and the movie actually made it look a little bit better than it really was. He said his kid was actually, I think, younger than 2 at the time. And they put him as older in the movie for the dialogue purposes, because it would always been, if you put a baby in there, there would have been no talking with him and his son. And so, and knowing the difference between having a year and a half year old or 2-year-old and a 5-year-old is a big difference between the two. And so, yeah, it was the one time that I had ever realized, wow, his story was actually even harder than that movie portrayed it. So anyway, I know that's getting off topic.
That's very interesting. I didn't know. I'm going to start using that in my investment talks, by the way.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, Wade. That's good. That's interesting. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and that just goes to show how unbelievably, heart-wrenching that scenario is. You even dumbed down, to your point, it's still something that if you understand what he went through, it's something that none of us ever want to go through. And we all, as entrepreneurs, we all have a time in our life when things get hairy or rocky or things are not going perfectly. It happens to every entrepreneur on the planet. And there's that creeping of fear that motivates a lot of us we're avoiding fear, and that motivates us to do well in business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this is one, you and I were talking offline about how many books come out and how an entrepreneur has to wade through them. And so now I want to give you the opportunity to really differentiate your book from others regarding the same topic. Will you do that for us?
I'd love to. A couple of thoughts here is that one, I go back to what I think Wall Street and the financial marketing community typically tries to advocate. And I don't necessarily blame them for this, but the investment community of retirement planning, let's say, or you see an investment ad, whether it's somebody carrying around a large number, like the ING commercials from a few years ago, where you carried around this large numerical number on your shoulder and compared it to your neighbor's number across the hedge versus a Morgan Stanley or a Merrill Lynch commercial that is encouraging you to have more so you can have a vacation house. But the messaging is always that you're never going to really have enough. So you should keep saving and keep earning and work longer so that you have more and more and more. And if you're a Wall Street firm, that makes some sense to me, is that you're publicly traded company. You will always want to increase your bottom line, you increase your assets under management, and that's part of the messaging. And I think that has just become the standard messaging about retirement in America. And the other thought is that you'll hear a statistic every other day come out that shows how bad of financial shape so many Americans are in. You've heard these over and over and over again. A couple of weeks ago, Wells Fargo had a brand new study that said 22% of Americans would rather die than run out of money in retirement. So there's all this fear around retirement, not having enough money. And then there's all this propaganda, if you will, that the messaging is that, hey, you'll never have enough. $1 million's not enough. You need 2 million. 2 million's not enough. You need 3 million. And what I have determined in this book, and I think that the overarching psychological help for entrepreneurs and really who it's really helped in real life already, who I've talked through or talked with, is that there really are some concrete financial benchmarks that Americans need to set their sights on. And if they can use these benchmarks, I think they're much more realistic and attainable than the number that is usually propagated as infinite. How much money do I need? Well, the number is kind of infinite. Yeah, you could get $1 million, but you'd be better off with 2, or you'd be better off with 2.5. You're better off with 3. And my messaging here, what I've learned from happy retirees in America, is that there's some thresholds to get to. Once we reach those thresholds, when it comes to what we're doing with our major costs, so our home, the cost of our home, whether it's paid off or not, the liquid investments that we've saved in our retirement accounts, and the number of income sources that we are able to have once we stop working in our primary jobs. If we can get to some threshold levels for most Americans, we can have the ability to not work or be in a position to retire. And that's the whole key about this book. It's not about stopping work. It's about being having financially the freedom to be able to stop working. So that is what I cover in this book. If you take a deeper dive into some of the bullet points I think are most telling, is that, and this is, again, I've learned over the last several months as I've talked to so many, let's say, real life people that they're on the verge of stopping working or they're in retirement now, is that the first thought is that you really have to have you have to know what the heck the money you've saved is really for. So the core pursuit, one of the questions I asked in the survey, by the way, the survey is 1,350 people. These are they're 55 years or older, so either close to retirement or in retirement, across 46 different states. And then I went back down to Georgia Tech here. I'm in Atlanta. So I went to the math department of Georgia Tech to have the data verified for statistical significance in comparing out of that 1,350 people, effectively those who rated themselves in the happiest 2 quintiles versus the least 2 happy quintiles. And then I'm able to compare all those 18 different financial metrics with a high level of confidence. And that's why I went down to Georgia Tech to get this data verified. So there's a big difference between the two groups when it comes to what we call core pursuits, or the number of, I call these hobbies on steroids in the book. It's kind of interesting to see not only are the hobbies on steroids or core pursuits of the book, not only are they different, but the happy retiree group, the group that's able to retire, let's say, earlier than most people in America, which is the other theme in the book, they have more of them. They have more ways that they want to spend their money. So there's this really important metric here, which is, hey, I have this utilization of the money that I have. Another thought that's an overarching theme throughout the book, and this kind of gets me to answer the question, does money buy happiness? My answer after writing this book is that it does. Money does buy happiness, but only to a point. And that point, throughout the book, there's these different financial thresholds to get to, and it makes some sense. And I think of it in terms of income. In my study, my numbers came back a little higher than the Princeton study, whereas the happy group needed to get to around $82,000 in income versus the 75 in the Princeton study. But what's interesting is that there's very much a plateau or a plateauing effect when it comes to money and happiness, meaning that if you look at this graphically, in the beginning stages of earning more or having your savings get to the next kind of, let's say, threshold, there's a lot in the beginning stages of this. There's a lot of either new comfort or I measure it as happiness. And then when you get to a certain point, money does buy more and more happiness, but at a much slower rate. So there's really a relationship that I call just diminishing marginal happiness. And I think of an example, you making $30,000 a year and you jump to making $60,000 or $70,000 a year. There's a huge jump in your comfort level and your ability of what you're able to spend. But if you think about it, a more extreme example, if you're making $1 million a year and you jump to $2 million a year, there's very little marginal gain in happiness because you're already, for $1 million a year, you're already kind of doing everything you want to do. Is another $1 million a year going to really matter? Sure, it adds to your comfort, but it's less of a psychological jump for you than it is from going from 30,000 to 60,000 or 70,000. So that's a really important theme throughout this book, is that, hey, look, we all know, most of us would agree, more money equals at least more security or cushion. And debate all day long whether more money leads to more happiness or not. My point here in the book, or my findings, are that, yeah, it does. More money does equal more happiness, but then we get diminishing marginal returns from that new incremental dollar. So that's another really important prevailing theme that goes throughout the book. another kind of really interesting part of what I have my data found, and this is kind of the psychological side of money, and the financial planning side of figuring out whether you should pay off a mortgage or not. I find a very cool graph, and I have a lot of graphical representations of the data and the findings in the book. One of them I think is really telling is that if you chart out the number of years to pay off a mortgage relative to levels of happiness, very clearly in my data, you'll see that as the years to pay off mortgage comes down. So think the light at the end of the tunnel gets greater and greater for paying off your very last mortgage check. Let's say it's going to Wells Fargo. As years to pay off mortgage comes down, the level of happiness reportedly goes up. So it's this wonderfully inverse relationship. Lower years to pay off mortgage, greater levels of happiness. So it shows me, as somebody that has been doing this, and I have always thought of this strictly by the numbers in my career. Do you have a 4% mortgage? Why would you ever pay that off if your interest rate's so low and you can make 10% in the stock market? That kind of argument. There's something really to be said for making the financial decisions based on, to some extent, the right psychology that gives you the maximum level of comfort and or happiness. And I have a whole chapter dedicated to that in the book. And how do you figure out a way to get rid of your mortgage as soon as humanly possible? Another thought here has to do with multiple income and multiple sources of income. In the investment community, we always talk about diversification and asset allocation. You don't want to have all of your money invested just in the United States or just overseas or just in stocks or just in bonds or just in energy or just in utilities. But we very rarely ever hear a discussion about when we stop working at our primary careers or we sell our company, let's say, as entrepreneurs. We rarely hear about the diversification of the different number of income sources that we draw from. So we think of income and spending in retirement. We think of our income as one big stream, the Rio Grande, let's say. And that may be, in a lot of working people's career, you're able to make a large stream of income while you're working. But then you stop or you sell your company and that goes away. Well, there's a lot of power in now replacing that stream of income with lots of different tributaries. So would you rather one check for $10,000 a month, or would you rather 10 $1,000 checks for the rest of your life? And my answer, and part of what I discuss in the book, what I learned through my research, is there's a real sense of comfort, call it happiness, as we increase the number of different income sources we have in retirement. And there's a lot of psychological benefit from knowing that if one of those income sources, something goes wrong, I've got lots of other ones to replace it. So the thought of having some rental income or properties in retirement is important. The thought of having, of course, some sort of Social Security, whether it's there or not, for our audience, remains to be seen. Not that many people have pensions anymore, but again, my data set did, because it's an older data set, age 55 and up, average age in the survey is 61. So I think for what I talk about in the book is that as we evolve throughout the next 10 years or 20 years, as you're crafting your way to be able to stop working, got to really understand and think about not having multiple ways you're getting your income. Of course, one of those ways is generating a steady rate of income from the investments that you have. And I talk about that too in the book. And I'm a big believer in income-oriented investing, meaning that I want to see steady cash flow from dividends that come from stocks, and interest that comes from bonds, and distributions that come from lots of other areas in the marketplace. But if you add those three together, you get a yield. You get a really steady cash flow from what your investments are. And if you start shifting your thinking to that, as opposed to the value going up and down with the stock market, then you get a sense of comfort as, hey, here's another income stream that I can add to my overall retirement planning or early retirement planning that I can really count on. So I dedicate another chapter in the book to that as well. So this really is a book about how to make the right decisions that will lead you to retiring, whether that's in America, quite frankly, if you can retire at all, you're ahead of the game. You're ahead of really 90% of people. But the whole thought about this book is to set you up now. If you're 30 or 40 or 50 and you still have a fair amount, you have a lot of years left. The book is set up to help you make all of those decisions that lead to shaving a year or two or maybe five off of having to work. And again, the younger you are and you read this book, the more years you'll likely be able to shave off. If you're 60 and you're reading this book, there's still plenty of information that'll help you set yourself up for retirement. But it's really even more, it's technically the earlier you do any of this when it comes to investing and prudent financial planning, obviously the better off you are in the longer run. So those are all the things that I try to tie together. There's psychological aspects to the book. Talk about personal finance and behavioral finance when it comes to being an investor. And then the 18 traits of what retirees, what kind of cars people have. I've got a lot of feedback about the car data, how many core pursuits you need to have in life. I even talk about where happy retirees eat versus unhappy retirees when it comes to dining out, how many kids they have, and vacation time. They're really interesting data. Happy retirees take there's a statistically significant difference between the amount of time they spend vacationing or doing life experiences with the money that they have saved. So to me, it's just so much interesting data that you can then choose what parts of the data relate back to you and your family and see if that helps you retire sooner than you're able to, that you might have thought. And that's how I tied this book together. So I think it really is a unique perspective on money, happiness. It's not just a financial book about save, spend less, save more, kind of that old I would say fundamentally sound strategy. This is trying to go beyond that with the psychological aspects of the things you need to do to be able to stop working or be in a position to retire when you want to.
So Wes, thank you for taking us through that. And I have one question before, I have a couple different questions, but I guess, how would you want the reader to engage with this book? You just broke it down great for us, but is this a book they can jump in and jump out based on where they're at in life? Or is this one they should really start and read all the way through?
Yeah, there's a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think I always think of even some of my favorite books. I've never read the entire book. I've read parts that I've gotten what I think I need to get out of the book. And I've told people in talks about this book, I say, look, read the intro and the first 3 chapters, read chapter 8, which is the investment chapter, and then skip to the appendix on page 2 in the 200s and read the 5 page of the appendix that give you the 18 traits. If you do that, you can get through this book and call it 45 minutes. And I think it's a wonderful way to spend 45 minutes to an hour. Otherwise, it's a very digestible book, and I've heard people that have read it in 3 or 4 hours. I'd love for everybody to read every single word, but you could literally read the first 3 chapters, then chapter 8, then the appendix, and get a whole lot out of this book. The other thought is that I have 5 secrets. Those are the 5 core chapters, and if you've got some of those financial areas taken care of, let's say your mortgage situation is taken care of, maybe you want to read about developing multiple income streams is something you need to work on. So you can certainly break down and pick and choose some of the chapters that make most sense for you.
And this next question is really taking your summary a little bit more in depth. I guess if we were to try and break it down into just a couple sentences, and that's if the reader can only take away one concept, principle, or action item out of everything that you just laid out for us, your entire book, what would you want that to be?
I want people to understand that there are, contrary to popular belief, being able to stop working and be in a financial position of security is more attainable and accessible than most people think. I'm trying to give investors and families those bare minimum critical thresholds or benchmarks to get to. Call them financial bare minimums in the book. The amount of income that quote unquote takes to get to be happy, what you need to do with your mortgage, how many income streams you should have to be in the happy retiree group versus the unhappy retiree group. You put all that together, and that's my financial takeaway here, is that being able to stop working or be in a position to retire is more attainable than most people think. And that's what I've outlined here in this book. Those are the financial traits for happy retirees. They're the ones that get to retire on time or maybe even early. And if we can learn from those people and emulate those same success patterns, then it can go a very long way for somebody who's thinking about doing the same thing.
So it seemed like a lot of those things that you brought up, I know there's much more in the book, but a couple of those things that you brought up, it seemed like that security, like you said, paying off the mortgage, that some of those things were more of the more secure we feel. Is that what you found? The more secure we feel, the happier we are. So sometimes it's not a dollar amount, but if the mortgage is paid off and certain things are taken care of, then that's one of the keys to happiness is security.
Well, there's no question about it that we've got to feel as though we can make it through good times and bad financially and not have to worry about putting food on the table or paying our mortgage. Going back to my story, my story about Chris Gardner. So, if money buys happiness, it buys three things. It buys safety and security. It buys health and the ability to pay for good health care and stay active and stay healthy. And it buys freedom. And those three things, freedom, health, and safety/security, those are things that in America fundamentally have a little bit of a price tag on them, whether we like it or not. And it's not an extraordinary price tag, Wade. But it certainly requires some sort of financial benchmarking, and that's part of why I've tried to equate the two together. I mean, how much money does it really take? And that's what I try to answer here in the book.
Do you have a favorite quote from your book, Wes?
It's funny. I love quotes. I feel like I have quotes in everything I do. My favorite quote is on the front cover from Clark Howard. It's quote, "Read this book." But no, that was just a funny testimonial. But you really, I have favorite charts in this book. I'm a little bit of a data nerd when it comes to behavioral finance. So instead of a favorite quote, I've got a favorite chart, and my favorite chart is the relationship between happiness and years left to pay off your mortgage. So that's my favorite chart as a substitution for favorite quote.
So, Wes, I believe that for those that take advantage of your book, there will be some paradigm shifts, and like you said, you're already going against the trying to get rid of the fear. And this next question is going along those lines as well. And that's, if there's a book that you can recommend on the way it's impacted your life and the way it's created a paradigm shift, what would you suggest to the readers?
Let's see. There's so many. It's hard to choose from. I will tell you that what sticks with me the most, at fear of being unoriginal, are Malcolm Gladwell books, and not just one, but them in combination. I love Outliers and the thought and the secret of success, hard work, and quite frankly, luck. And those three things together tell a lot of stories. So I'm a big believer in Outliers from Gladwell, and then his follow up, which is David and Goliath, which talks about smaller companies that really have advantages against larger companies. I find that in my work as an entrepreneur all the time. I'm such a believer in that, and those two things really, really stick with me to this day.
Wes, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book. But before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listener to get more information on you and your book, You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think?
Sure. So it's available via like any other book, bookstores, Amazon. I think the best place is just my website, wesmoss.com, WESMOSS, just wesmoss.com. And there's a link, obviously, to the book, some reviews about the book, and then it'll take you right to Amazon. And that's the best way to do it.
Well, excellent. Well, again, thank you for coming on and sharing this. I think this is really going to be an eye-opener for a lot of people reading it.
Well, I love that we connected. I really do hope it helps, and I hope people love the book.
Thanks again for listening in today. If you'd like to get more information on Wes Moss or his book, You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think, just look at the show notes at the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.